So right now, I already know that when the listeners hearing me say this, they're like, this guy must be one of those crazy conservative people that all he wants is for conservative representation of college campuses and free speech that, free speech this. And then the moment I say something about DEI, they're going to say, this crazy blue-haired liberal wants this or that and can't. And I think that's exactly the problem.
My name is Linda Lorelle, and I'm asking you to have the courage to listen with an open mind to all of our voices, because our voices matter. Hi, everybody. It's Linda Lorelle, and this is Our Voices Matter. Year 6. Can you believe it? We are now launching our 6th year, celebrated our 5th anniversary in December of 2023. I can think of no better way to launch this new season than with one of my all-time favorite guests. His name is Manu Meel, the CEO of BridgeUSA, 25 years young, also host of the Hopeful Majority podcast. Manu is someone who always gives me hope because he's got his finger on the pulse of what is going on with our young people across the country as he tries to help them have more constructive conversations. I was especially interested in speaking with him in the aftermath of October 7th and the launch of the Israel-Hamas War and all of the conflict that has been happening on college campuses in the wake of that. So much to talk about with Manu. So let's get right to it. Here now, my conversation with Manu Meel. Manu, my friend, it is so great to see you again. How are you?
It's good to be back. It's good to be back. I feel like I was actually going to ask you right before this recording started, how are you doing? But I realized that I could just hold that for the podcast because this is like we've set these up as checkpoints, and so they become our opportunity to catch up.
Yes. So this is the third time I think you've been on the podcast, and a lot has transpired in terms of what's going on in the world and also what's going on in your world. And I thought this would be a really great time to catch up, find out how things are going with BridgeUSA and the work that you're doing on college campuses across the country. I know you've launched your own podcast, the Hopeful Majority podcast, which is awesome, by the way. So if you haven't subscribed, listeners and viewers out there, please do. It's amazing. So I want to talk about that. And I guess let's start with what's happening with BridgeUSA as you're going across the country. I know you're expanding. Remind people of what Bridge is and what your mission is.
Yeah. So for context and for all the new people joining us, Bridge USA is essentially a national student organization focused on helping to facilitate conversations across students of ideological differences on college campuses and now high schools, actually. And as we've scaled and grown, focused on how do we create these environments of pluralism and open-mindedness on college campuses, it's hard for me to talk about Bridge without talking about, all of that's going on in college campuses with, whether it's the Claudine Gay resignation from Harvard, or before that, the congressional testimony of the MIT, UPenn, and Harvard presidents in Congress on anti-Semitism, or all that we saw in October after the 10/7 attack on Israel on colleges. I think it's in some ways, Linda, in some ways it's not surprising to me, having done this work for so long on colleges, and I'm happy to get into why. And also in other ways, I think this is only another sort of predictor for what's to come. I feel like in some ways we almost live through smaller examples of things and then see them materialize in greater detail as time moves on. I feel like this is just a flash in the pan. And we're going to see a lot more of this because we're just not equipping people with the ability to have constructive conversations at this time.
Exactly. Okay. So I want to start with something you just said. You said it's not surprising.
Yeah.
What you're referring to what you're seeing on campuses right now. Okay. Mm-hmm. Say more. Why?
So a little bit about this, my story here, but I'm currently actively working on this op-ed, and essentially the two main claims that I want to posit is one is that none of this should be surprising. And two is this is a moment for us to prep for the future. And so let's stay on number one. Why is this not surprising? So as you know, 2017 was when I was a freshman in college, which now feels like eons ago, but it's only six years ago. But it was at UC Berkeley. And for the audience, I was a pre-med student. So I had like zero interest in politics or democracy or any of this. I was just trying to follow my mom's path and go be a doctor. And in second semester of my freshman year, so February of 2017, we had the speaker by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos come to campus. And Milo is this sort of like right-wing provocateur that's kind of dropped off the map since then. But he used to make a killing off of going to campuses and stirring up people and all that. And when Milo came to campus, it led to UC Berkeley's largest free speech protest on campus since the 60s when Dr. King came to campus. And that's what caused us to think about, well, there's something deeper happening in both our campuses, but our country. Like why would students leave 4 hours of class to like firebomb each other, right, over a speaker, right? Like this was a real there was violence. There was $2.2 million of damages to the college. And so we started these conversations on campus, which turned into Bridge Berkeley, and then that turned into BridgeUSA. Then that next year in 2018, we had another string of protests and challenges on campus. Then in 2020, we had what happened with the Floyd protests and what we saw at the Black Lives Matter movement, and then with President Trump coming to office, leaving office. Essentially, all of this to say that the history of the United States in the last 10 years can be simplified into one very simple sentence, and that is that what we're seeing today is a result of a society telling us that dialogue across lines of difference is impossible. Because when we give into our incapacity and inability to have those conversations, of course, what you're going to see is massive identitarian conflict and rifts. The last quick thing I'll just say on this, and then let me know what you're thinking, is I learned this fact recently, Linda, that colleges, when the first woman was allowed into the Ivy Leagues?
Are you asking
as a student?
No, I do not.
In the 1960s, which is insane. And I'll tell you why. I tell you why I bring this up. Colleges have like embarked on this massive multiracial democratic experiment where only since the 60s have they been starting to build student bodies that are genuinely diverse and have really different opinions and different backgrounds and different stories and different ideas. And it is only natural to expect that if you don't put any work or effort into trying to create an environment where difference actually leads to more rather than less, then naturally the history of humanity is riddled with conflict when you have people of very different ideas coming together. The college campus today is only like 50 years old in terms of its modern conception.
That is such important context. And I don't know why I was so shocked when you said the 60s, because I shouldn't have been. And it makes sense when you think about it in the broader context of how things have progressed or not in this country. So, okay, so you've spoken to why it's not surprising that we're seeing what we are on college campuses right now. Let's talk more specifically. Let's go back, talk sequentially, starting with October 7th and the aftermath. What did you see? Give us a sense of what you were seeing and feeling and hearing on college campuses within that first week or so after October 7th.
So there was actually, I think, a little bit of a gap between October 7th and what started happening in college campuses. And it's interesting because in some ways that gap makes me think that it's not that college campuses necessarily are causing the conflict or driving the conversation. It's that I think college campuses just happen to be one of the most volatile playgrounds for our politics. It's another arena now. Universities are no longer just places for education. Just like business used to be just a place for business, now the workplace is also highly politicized.
Right.
And so what happened was when 10/7 happened and the tragedy that day, we got a lot of inbound from our students, and there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of confusion as to what to do on campus. And then as the news cycle started going, and as what I call the elite Twitter crowd went to play, and as people started to essentially lose sight of what had happened and focus on, well, what's the broader implication, right? What's my tribe going to say, and how do I make the most of this moment? I think then what you saw was that trickle down into campuses. And the question became that you had students of deep conviction on one side, the Palestinian side, that believed a certain thing. You had students that were genuinely fearing for their lives on the Jewish side. And the reason why I brought up the unsurprising point is that on college campuses, you have a melting pot only when you create opportunities for there to be melting. There are very few instances where these communities ever actually interact on a campus in a productive manner, productive environment. You know, the Black Student Union never goes to the white students, right? The white students never go to the Hispanic Student Association. The Palestinian students stay here. The Jewish students and the Hillel group stay here because apparently everyone's on a defensive crouch. And so what do you expect when one of the most identitarian and painful conflicts in history is ripped open with such tragic impulse? Is that these students have no capacity to engage. And so naturally what happens is it's a fight for existential identity. And the moment it becomes a fight for existential identity, all the rules of civil society get thrown out the window. Because why wouldn't they?
Right.
If you're in a fight for your existence, you're going to do what you want to protect yourself.
It's so interesting when you frame it like that, when you think about everybody sort of retreating to their own tribe, to their own space. And, a lot of all of those organizations that you mentioned, Hillel, the Black Student Union, the Hispanic Student Association, whatever it might be on all the campuses, were all created as a means of inclusion, as a way of making students from that, from that group feel welcomed and like they had a place to go where they could be themselves fully. I think the unintended consequence is that it allowed people to then stay in those groups and not interact with others on a more regular basis. That's just, it's crazy to me, but that's what the consequence has been. And how are you with BridgeUSA trying to correct that or make that a better path?
Well, what's fascinating? You just helped me think of something. And this leads into why I think BridgeUSA is so important at this moment, which is that you essentially illuminated that in our search for inclusivity, we've created echo chambers, right? And in some ways, I think the past 10 years, with sort of the awakening of DEI work and diversity work and inclusion work, we've all focused on the first part, which is inclusion, right? Everybody's got to feel included. And the best way to make people feel included is to see their own people, right? To feel represented. Great. But we've left it at that. And we've forgotten that for it to, again, be 1 + 1 = 3, right? For it to be one in which all these people that are now different actually have the practice and ability to now work together. We haven't invested in that capacity. We haven't invested in the e pluribus unum part, right? Just there's a bunch of us here part. And so, okay, we've got to invest in each other's capacity. And that's where BridgeUSA comes in for the longest time, Linda, when I started this work in 2017, 2018, people used to say, all you do is you get people to talk to each other. Well, that's quite great. Go do that. And now it's like you get people to talk to each other. Holy shit. where have you been? And so I don't have much to say other than what we do is we help people that have never talked to each other have a conversation, because believe it or not, there's only two futures here. One future is that we figure it out and we figure out how to learn with and live with each other, or the alternative, and this is quite dystopian, is I don't think there's going to be massive conflict. I think what's going to happen is we're just going to try to innovate our way out of our inability to talk to each other, which is we're going to create these digital communities, and through AI, we're going to live very isolated, echo chambered lives, and we're just going to coexist like people that can't actually live together, but just coexist. And I actually think that's what's going to happen if we don't figure it out.
That makes me so sad to hear that, because to me, the whole richness of life is the human connection and interaction. And if we're not able to find a way to do that and see the value in it, then you're right. We'll have a completely different society. And it does sound very dystopian.
The human experience acquires that richness, as you're saying, of
Yes.
connection.
So what you're saying is that if we move into what you just suggested, then um, we lose that characteristic that makes us human, and
Yeah.
not a robot, not a machine, not
Yeah.
a thinking, feeling, expressing, emotional being that has the ability to think through, um, but not think in such a way that the rest of what makes us human isn't also present
Yeah.
and important.
I've actually never shared this thought because it's a relatively new one as we're having this conversation. But I've been thinking a lot again about, well, if we fail in this project, what happens? And I mean, humans are very smart, right? We're very smart. And the one thing that we always have figured out how to do is innovate our way out of challenge. And I think the easiest path here is one of of just coexistence without actual engagement. And we're already kind of naturally doing this, right? We just kind of live in our own echo chambers on social media. We've kind of tried to only make our own specific friends with those groups. We live in communities that now are relatively politically homogenous. There's less mixing. The way that schools are now being built are built in ways in which they're in zip codes, and zip codes are now being more and more politically segregated. It's in some ways a perversion of the way that society used to be divided, where now it's almost an intentional division along political lines. And I think that if you're a betting person, if you remember back to our first episode, I think that outcome is much more likely, not because I'm pessimistic, but because I think that what America's trying to pull off is so damn ambitious and unprecedented in the history of humanity. Like trying to make a society of 330 million people with different ideas and different backgrounds and different ethnicities get along, and not only just get along, not just coexist, but actually flourish, has literally never happened before. I think it would be the pinnacle of human achievement. It's what philosophers and social scientists have been trying to aspire for thousands of years. It's like, how do you get people that are different to build something that is better than what it would be on their own?
So when I think about that sort of a scenario for our world going forward, then that, of course, begs the question, so how do we govern a society like that? The power struggles then become even more pronounced, even more challenging than they are currently. That doesn't bode well. I mean, do you think that we are literally headed for another civil war?
No, and that's not like a no, because no, it's not going to happen. It's a very resolute no, and there's a couple of reasons why. But before I get into those reasons, I don't know if you saw, Linda, there was a new movie trailer that came out called Civil War, and it's going to be released in, I think, 2 or 3 months, and
I haven't seen it.
it's actually very scary. It's purposefully a movie built around what would happen if the United States went to a civil war, and it sort of plays out a couple of scenarios. And one of the things that we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be playing a commercial. We're going to try and play a commercial of this campaign at the end of each of those movie theater showings to show people,
meaning BridgeUSA, yes.
BridgeUSA and a couple other organizations,
Okay.
to actually demonstrate to people that it is in your power to avert that scenario right now. That you actually have the capacity
That's brilliant
to avert it.
to do that. Yeah.
That you watch that movie, you're scared, and then you're like, oh my God, what now?
Doesn't have
Actually,
to
it's
be
within
that
your
way.
capacity. Yes.
Yeah.
But here's why not. I think one is again that I think that we as a society have too much to lose. There's too much to lose. I think people right now are very flippant about what the world would look like and how much worse it can get and how bad they have it right now. And yet, I actually still don't think that most Americans have actually felt what it's like to be in a really malnourished, impoverished, and stricken society. I was just in India 2.5 months ago, and I went to some of the villages where we used to grow up a long time ago. And we don't have perspective on difficulty and challenge, and we have too much to lose. And the second reason, and it's much more, I think, aspirational, but I think that fundamentally the problem in the United States is not a problem of the masses polarizing. It's the problem of a few temperamentally extreme people across the ideological spectrum having a complete monopoly over the microphone. The simplest way to say it is your crazy uncle and your crazy niece are essentially ruining it for the entire family, and the rest of us are just going to sit by and let it happen.
Which is why both of us started our respective podcasts, which is I love the name of yours, The Hopeful Majority, because you're trying to drown out the crazy uncle and the crazy niece on either side, and focus on the voices of the vast majority of the family that actually does have hope and does want to see us come out of this, right?
Yeah. Yep. And actually, to your credit, your podcast was the first ever podcast where I actually publicly talked about that pod, and the notion of the hopeful majority. And again, a lot of people have heard the word exhausted majority. A lot of people have heard the word silent majority. If you're a part of the exhausted majority, there's no chance you're going to be mobilized. It's like, I'm exhausted, count me out already. The hopeful majority, the idea behind that is that we have the power to actually shape the behavior of the people that we put into power. And the question is whether or not we want to take that step. So all of the pessimism, I'm not pessimistic. I'm simply realistic about the challenge. And importantly, trying to help people understand that the challenges that they see in the United States today are completely understandable. If you're an alien civilization observing our country and you looked at human history for 100,000 years and then you saw the United States for 250, you're like, this hasn't gone up in flames yet. And
one way of looking at it.
It's like they always go up in flames.
Right.
And this one has got nukes and it's got so many different people, and it lives in an incredibly competitive world. And there's 350 million guns in this country. And it hasn't gone up in flames yet. There's only up from here.
Yeah. I like looking at it from that perspective. Okay. I want to go back to, so we talked a little bit about the immediate aftermath of October 7th and what it was like on college campuses. And you kind of talked about the gap and the media cycle and how things sort of started to infiltrate into the campuses. So let's fast forward now to the congressional hearings. Yep. And the references, of course, to the three presidents, two of whom have now lost their posts or resigned their posts. Give me your take on all of that.
So I think that the congressional testimonies and what they essentially unveiled were colleges that were completely caught off guard and not ready for what they're supposed to do. Universities are the second oldest institution in Western society behind the church. The first university was created in 1100 in, I don't know how to pronounce it, but in Italy, Bologna. Bologna, exactly.
Bologna.
I think that there's a complete collapse in leadership at these institutions. I think that universities and their leaders don't have a North Star for what exactly it is that they're trying to fight for. I don't think they have a sense of direction. And I understand it. These are academics, right, that are trying to essentially build an environment where students and kids can learn and feel safe. And yet at the same time, they have this whole thing going on in politics. And universities are inherently a battleground in politics. And they don't know how to navigate that. And this didn't start with 10-7. This goes on way before. You had challenges around free speech, where to draw the line. You have challenges around DEI. Universities are unsure about what to do with things like gender studies and critical race theory and all of these different subject matters. And I think it's all because the principal mission for which a university was founded is lost, which is that universities are meant for two things. One is to produce amazing scholarship, and two is to create an environment where young people can learn and prep for the world that they're going to inherit. That's it. Everything else should come from other places. And that lack of clarity is, I think, what's causing it.
I want to add another element, I think, to this mix that that really has reared its ugly little head during this whole resignation of Dr. Gay.
Okay.
That's the money. That's the donors.
Hmm.
That is the especially at the elite universities, the power that the moneyed interests at those universities have to effectuate change. And that was a critical piece, in my view, from everything that I've read. And I've tried to read a lot about, all that's happened over these last few weeks. And that was a part of it. So I think we need to address that, at least acknowledge that is also a piece of the equation. I don't know what you think.
I think you're right from an objective standpoint, which is that donors have a ton of influence at universities. And I think this is one of the, I honestly can't remember the last time when donors in such a public manner made significant demands upon universities. And essentially, I think the college administration had their hands tied in terms of what they could do, because the question was, well, if the money's gone, we can't run the university. And so it creates a very difficult position for them. I will say this one thing, though, and I don't know where you stand on this, but from my experience in colleges over the last 5 to 6 years, there is one big problem that the donor class, I think, is right about. And that is that students are scared to say what's on their mind. Students are scared to say what's on their mind. And this is not just, like there aren't, enough conservative voices on campus or liberal voices on campus. When I would go on a campus and we would ask them, hey, come join this discussion. It's a safe discussion where we are essentially going to talk about, in the moment you said the P word, politics, students would say, I can't join that discussion. I can't let things come out, or I'm scared to join this conversation or tell you what my opinion is because I don't want my faculty member to judge me, or I don't want my fellow friends to judge me.
But don't you think that that's just a microcosm of how everyone feels right now? Everybody, there are so many people who are afraid to say whatever their point of view is because they think they're going to be shouted down or demonized or labeled by the other, which is the whole point about why it's important to be able to have the constructive conversation without demonizing each other. Everybody is afraid of that. And the college campuses used to be the bastion where you could go and experience and be a little bit more free because it was sort of this bubble and this isolated time in your life. But now the political vitriol and the political environment that we're all living in has made its way onto campus. Do you agree with that? Or
yes. No. The political vitriol. That's why I think the universities have become another battleground for our politics. But it is one thing to expect for us to be able to say what's on our mind at the grocery store. It's a whole nother thing to expect that to happen on a college campus. If we can't have a legitimate and constructive exchange of ideas on a campus, I don't know where else we have that.
Where else
right? And this is, again, not what I find frustrating about this conversation, like honestly most other conversations in our politics, is that each of these issues has become hijacked by a certain side, right? So right now, I already know that when the listeners hearing me say this, they're like, this guy must be one of those crazy conservative people that all he wants is for conservative representation of college campuses and free speech that, free speech this. And then the moment I say something about DEI, they're going to say this crazy blue-haired liberal wants this or that and can't. And I think that's exactly the problem. I think it's okay to say two things at once, which is that you need to make an environment safe for marginalized people and people that don't have the capacity and want communities to feel safe so they can thrive on campus. And at the same time, that you should say whatever's on your mind in a productive manner that allows you to feel like you can get your voice out and, importantly, get challenged. And it's like this weird movie that we live in where you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. And it's weird.
It's insane, as if life is all black and white. It's all left and right. It's all right and wrong. It's all what my way or the wrong way.
Yeah.
Life is in the nuance. It's all shades of gray. It's all in the middle. It's all that other stuff. And we have to, and our brains are actually able to synthesize and hold all of that at the same time.
We have the privilege to do it.
We can. But the question is, do we choose to do it? You know, it feels like there was a time when it was okay to be able to hold two thoughts at the same time and know that, you know, it's okay. Well, I might not agree with you, but I don't think you're a horrible human being, and I'm not going to ban you from my life, and I'm not going to, you know, say that you're the devil incarnate just because we disagree on this one thing. So we've gotten to this point now where it's completely tribal, completely.
Yeah.
To the exclusion of everything else.
And it's almost like we've taken a step back on the evolutionary ladder, right? And we've essentially foregone our capacity to critically think and process nuanced ideas. And yet, this is where I think there's a ton of opportunity. The sort of the frustrating, like, throw up our hands moment that you and I have reached at in this conversation, which is like, why can't we just do this? Is, I think, the exact same moment that almost everybody else is experiencing in one way or the other, if they haven't already. Like, this is the exact, I think the way out of this problem is relatively simple. And the reason for it is because the problem is, again, not with everybody. The problem is with a few people. And importantly, these few people, and I will be very clear, they have to exist across the ideological spectrum. The moment you think that these few people are only on that side and they're not on your side, then this again becomes a politicized endeavor. It's what I call the temperamentally extreme people, the people that are closed-minded, believe in their zero-sum mentality. And here's the kicker. I think that they build their brands off of our propensity to hate each other. I think when we start to realize that we're actually being played, and importantly, we're pawns in somebody else's game, I think that's actually what's going to turn people around. It's not going to be some aspirational message. It's not going to be like, it's that you're being played. And the question is whether or not you're going to keep your head in the sand and keep throwing your hands up, or actually make your voice heard so that we break their game. Let's play the game that everybody else wants to play. And that's the game in which this thing not only works, but thrives.
I love it. I love that. And I agree. I completely agree. So when you were talking about getting back to the campuses for a second, specifically, I'm wondering, does Bridge have a chapter at Harvard, Cornell, Penn? Do you have chapters there?
We have stuff starting up at Cornell. We have something starting up at Penn. And we're actually actively assisting a student right now that's at Harvard that's actually created a hotline for conflict on campus for students. And so we're actively working on all three of those campuses to get stuff going. Yeah,
I was just curious because, given the significance and the visibility of the presence of the universities, I was just wondering if you had chapters on those campuses, how those conversations were going. I mean, what are you hearing about what's happening on those specific campuses?
Can I actually give you a quick observation that I had about this, which is, what's really interesting is that you only see these blowups at elite Ivy League colleges. I really tried to search the news. I went through our entire chapter network. I asked our other campuses, like, what's it like on your campus? And for some reason, these blowups are only happening at elite private colleges. And
interesting.
I don't exactly know why that is. I have a couple of thoughts, but I'm not ready to share them yet because they're not solid enough. But that is something important to note because I think it speaks to a broader trend, which is that, I'm just not sure, but it's something I want to raise.
How many campuses are in your network now?
75.
So out of 75 campuses, you're only seeing these blowups, all of this happening.
On elite private schools.
Private school campuses. Interesting.
And the ones that are catching the news are only in elite private school campuses too.
Well, yeah.
And
that's what I was wondering. I mean, you're talking directly to the campuses.
Yeah, we're talking to the campuses.
We haven't heard about it in the news doesn't mean it isn't happening.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is that even on the campuses where you are seeing conflict that isn't in the news, it's not as pronounced.
Not as pronounced.
And I'll tell you one other thing, and this is again what the entire op-ed hook is around, which is, and I'm so proud of our amazing chapter team for this. Right after the 10/7 attack, one of our chapter team members created a discussion guide. We do this as a rapid response plan. We created a discussion guide around how to discuss this conflict specifically. We distributed it across our chapters. And over the course of those next 3 weeks, we had 21 different college campuses pull off extraordinarily productive and effective discussions where students of different backgrounds from these conflict areas actually engaged and listened and worked together. And we never hear those stories of success. Never. And the broader point that I'm getting to is that we're in this, like, I've heard this term that I just love, and I don't know who came up with it, so I'm going to pretend it's mine. It's called the outrage industrial complex. And the entire notion around the outrage industrial complex is that outrage sells, nuance doesn't. And there was only one story I saw over the last 3 months of a story of success, which was by NBC News. They covered this professor at Dartmouth who essentially hosted a class that allowed open discussion on this topic, which then expanded to the entire campus community, and Dartmouth had 0 blowups, unlike the other Ivy League colleges. But beyond that, 0 coverage, Linda. And so I say this again as our media and our narratives have a lot of play in how they shape what happens. So because if the only thing you see is a shit show, that's all you're going to get.
Yeah. And then you add to that people's ability to basically get news from the channel that reinforces, or the channel or the media outlet, whether it's television or print or digital, that reinforces what they already believe. So there's that. That's a whole nother conversation. But the media is critical in all of this in terms of the narratives that are displayed and that are put in front of us every day.
It's absolutely critical. And just to go to your more direct question of like, well, what are we now seeing on campuses since then? Which is that we're seeing students that are just exhausted. Students are exhausted and they just want to learn. They're like, why? Forget all of this discussion and all this stuff, and this is and this is the moment I've been waiting for. This is the moment I've been waiting for. And we saw this year, not on campuses, but with some of our other stakeholders, is that oftentimes something is to get so bad that it's right in your face that things get fixed. And for all the sort of the doom and gloom that we've talked about thus far, the amount of inbound that we've received as an organization, the amount of people throwing up their hands and saying enough is enough, the moment is now. And I think this year, 2024, with the presidential election coming up, with almost like 95% of humans participating in this election just not excited about it, people are looking for an alternative. And the alternative that we want to provide is not an electoral alternative, which I know a lot of people find dissatisfying, but it's an alternative that I think is better in the long run. And that is, how do we actually fix the operating system of our society? How do we stitch together the civic fabric? How do we make it so that 2028, 2032, 2036 are election years that are not defined about turning against each other, but they're defined by us actually figuring out how to work together. And I think that's going to start to happen because people are just so exhausted. And that's what we're seeing on campuses right now.
Well, that is definitely a signal of hope, a sign of hope. And it makes me feel a little better. And I hope that it gives our audience members something to grasp onto in a positive light as we start to wrap up this conversation. So I guess first thing, one of the last things I want to ask you about is what's next for you. What is, I keep saying that you are exactly the type of person who needs to run for office. And I know that that's something that is somewhere in the back of your mind, and you might do that someday. But in the meantime, as you run BridgeUSA, and I know you're collaborating with many organizations, including Convergence, which we are both on the board of in DC, what's next for you to further this mission of the hopeful majority?
Well, first I have to get over this cold. I don't know. There's something going around in the air. And
Yeah.
hey, one thing I do know is that if everybody's sick, they're not going to fight each other. And so I got to get over this cold, man. I've been sick for 5 to 6 days. So I apologize if you're listening to this. I sound underwater. But I'm at this very interesting point where, and I know you and I've talked about this, which is that what I'm seeing in my day-to-day life doesn't match up with what's happening in the national news. So like the more and more I've worked on Bridge, the more and more I've worked with these amazing young people, met leaders like yourself, the day-to-day life of amazing people that are really ambitious, kind-hearted, empathetic, generally want to work together, want to leave people alone, mind their business, is so prevalent. And yet that seems like an alien reality to the news. And there's just there's a gap, there's a gap. And I think that entire gap is, again, affirming that hypothesis, which is that there's that hopeful majority that is being completely silenced by this vocal minority. And what I have to figure out how to do, and I think what this broader field of organizations like Convergence, BridgeUSA, all the other folks have to figure out how to do, is what does it mean to build a legitimate political coalition around the hopeful majority? How do you get people motivated to vote on something as squishy as temperament? Because that is very squishy. Like, what unites you and I we haven't even talked much about our ideologies, but I know for a fact what unites you and I and the listeners of this podcast is that we're open-minded. We want to talk to each other. We're relatively curious. We care. The question is whether or not that temperamental bond is strong enough to overcome the identity of politics and actually allow you to vote. I think that the next, Obama, the next, pick your favorite candidate, Reagan, whatever, is going to be the person that's able to figure out how to stitch together this hopeful majority. And I think if you can figure out how to do that, I think you win a lot of presidential elections, because I think that people I think people are ready to say, I don't care what the Democrats think. I don't care what the Republicans think. I just care about what's right. So let's just do that.
Well, and I hope that the exhausted majority, all of the folks out there who are exhausted by all of this, I really hope that they find the strength and the courage to cast a vote, whatever it might be, and not sit it out, because that is a choice. Sitting it out is a choice. And it's a choice that basically throws up your hands and says, I don't have a role to play in this constitutional democracy that is actually going to make a difference. Every single vote makes a difference. If we all sit it out, we have nothing. And so that's the message that I want to get across right now.
Can I just underscore that?
Yes, please. You have to vote.
No, which is that advanced democracies don't crash, they slump into authoritarianism. Oftentimes, and the slumping into authoritarianism happens when people take the poison of apathy. And I think you're absolutely right, Linda, in that this is why I don't think we're ever going to have a civil war. That doesn't mean I don't think we're going to have a bad outcome. But I think the alternative to us making it work is going to be a society that slowly slumps into a system in which people live their own individualistic lives in their own echo chambers, do their thing, and just stop caring about what's out there. And I think over time, you're going to see that codified and more reified. And that is so bleak. And not only is it so bleak, but when we think about what we're trying to build in the span of human history, it's like we've been afforded this amazing, awesome opportunity at one of the most trying times in history to do our best. Don't you want to be a part of that? Why would you want to sit that one out? Because if you want to sit that one out, then boy, you'd be sitting a lot of history out. And you don't want to be part of that team.
Listen to Manu, everybody. Listen to him. You are so wise beyond your years. What are you, 25 now?
I turned 25. I can now get the elite rental car collection of Hertz.
Oh my gosh. I just love you.
I work with some amazing people.
Well, you are a gift, my friend. You are a gift to all of us, that you are doing this work, that you are using your intellect and your passion and your education to do something meaningful. And you're making a huge difference. I mean, you're at 75 campuses now. I think when we first started talking a couple of years ago, it was around 40 something.
Well, our goal is we're now going to aim for 250. So that's our magic number, and 250 in the next 18 months.
That's incredible. And you're right. The time is now. The time is now. Your work on these campuses is needed now more than ever. So thank you for the work that you're doing. You know, you always have a friend and an ally and a supporter.
Thank you for all you do.
Whatever I can do, just pick up the phone, call. Everybody out there, tune into the Hopeful Majority podcast with the one and only Manu Meel. Thank you so much, Manu. We will catch up again soon, I promise.
I'll see you soon, Linda. Take care, everybody.
Bottom line, we are all in this together. We all have a role to play, and we must all embrace our individual respective roles as members of this constitutional democracy. It is within our power to change the trajectory and to change the narrative. We just have to decide to do it. By listening to this podcast, you are taking that step, and I do thank you for that. We will link to everything that Manu is doing, BridgeUSA, Hopeful Majority podcast, and everything else that he has on his plate. He is one to watch. He is a leader of today and most certainly a leader of tomorrow. Thank you so much for being a part of the Our Voices Matter community. We appreciate you. Please spread the word, like, subscribe, share, and then join us again next time. We'll see you then.